Hello and welcome to Creative Storytelling. The purpose of this workshop is to inspire you to tell your story, to discover what is possible for you and what it means to be an authentic storyteller. My name is Ann-Marie Hak, and I'm from Houston, BC, home of the world's largest fly rod. I'm 29 years old. I'm half Czech, half Filipina, and I'm the first generation of Canadians in my lineage. I'm so excited to present this presentation to you. In fact, I actually used to work for the Houston Today newspaper, so creating this workshop for you feels really close to my heart and almost like being back home. Our agenda today is going to focus on what is possible for you, what is authentic storytelling, tips for writing fiction, finding the voice of your characters, storyboarding, and answering any questions you may have. So, what is possible for you? When envisioning where you want your story to be shared, it is crucial to asking this question and knowing where you would like to share it so you can determine how to format your story and be aware of any time restrictions. For example, it's going to be a lot different if you are writing a 10-minute short film compared to a 300-page novel. I'm going to speed through some of your possibilities in creative writing based on the work that I have done. This is definitely going to be a flex on my part, but as I go through these, I want you to imagine your story in its place. So, do you want to tell your story visually, like through a short film about a newfie stepfather trying to bond with his grieving Filipino stepson on a camping trip at a wishing fall? What about in a comic book featuring funny conversations you and your mom have? How about online or physically in a book for everyone to read about the things you learned from a narcissistic father? Or are you collaborating with others to explore audio in a supernatural Buffy meets Stranger Things kind of thriller podcast? Whatever medium you tell your story in, the most important thing is to be authentic. In some cases, you might be writing someone else's story. I've actually been working on a screenplay about the time my mom snuck out of a convent in the Philippines to see Jaws in theaters. I want to be authentic to her story, but I have to accept that I won't get every detail accurate or in with those time restrictions. So, how do you solve that? Well, first, acknowledge the responsibility you're undertaking and accept that you aren't perfect. Then ask, what is the heart of this story, the theme? Does the plot you just wrote serve the theme or not? Was the information that was shared with you, what parts of it fit with the theme and what don't? This will help make it easier to know what you need to cut and what you need to keep. For example, the real story about my mom sneaking out to see Jaws includes a bomb going off in the theater. In the 7-minute version of the story I wrote, a gun goes off instead because it's a lot harder to tie up loose ends with a massive event like a bomb instead of a gun. To write great fiction is a whole presentation on its own. So I'm going to tell you the fundamentals that you will always come back to time and time again. Whether you are writing Harry Potter or Outlander, you will always ask these questions. Number one, what are the rules of this world? When it comes to world building, having limitations is what makes stories interesting. For example, magic in Harry Potter is food coming to life at Hogwarts, but not in the real world. And time travel in Outlander is limited to Claire being one of the few people that can travel back and forth. Next, look at the basics of character building. And it's always these three questions. What does your character want? Who or what is in their way? And what are their flaws that are making it harder for them to reach their goal? We want to see characters work for it. Nobody wants to read or see a story of some all powerful something that just gets through to the end. Life is about struggle, and we want to see that relevancy and resonate with that in the stories that we read or see. So, for example, Claire wants to get back to her timeline, but she can't because she's being forced to follow these Scotsmen, who are the people that are in her way, and gets into trouble often because she speaks her mind and doesn't listen to men. Her flaw. An advanced character building question would be, how does their strength impede them? For example, in the same example of Outlander, Claire's strength as a doctor causes her trouble because she gets mistaken as a witch in this timeline. And finally, the best stories are the ones where you can strip all the magic away and still be left with a rich storyline. That comes from complicated relationships. Ask yourself, who are your characters close to? Who do they avoid? What secrets do they keep from their best friend? These are some simple, basic questions to give your characters more dynamic. Let's play a game. What do you think these two people are saying? What assumptions did you make about them based on how they are dressed and their body language? If you were writing this scene, how would you invert people's general assumptions and surprise them? My basic tips for finding the voice of your character are making a collage about them. I've done this where I've just Google search pictures of what they might look like, and putting together on like a Google Doc, or if I've had magazines, I've done that before. Their likes and dislikes. This all is there to help, usually just to describe your character. Another great trick is actually mimicking them. What do they sound like? What words do they use often? I actually know a lot of writers that will even act out their characters to find an authentic voice. But my favorite is probably people watching. I actually have a note folder on my phone dedicated to my former used car manager because of the way he talked. He always used Top Gun references to describe car sales. And I just have that saved on my phone, knowing that one day I may go back and make a character out of that. Storyboarding. So personally, I don't storyboard because it actually takes me a lot longer to draw something than it does to write it out. But I would say that in my experience, the most important thing about storyboarding is drawing from the perspective of your protagonist, or an omniscient perspective, which is the all seeing view. Since I don't consider myself an expert of this, I have actually brought a resource with me of someone that I know to be one of the greatest storyboard artists in the world. Hayao Miyazaki is by far one of the best storyboard artists in the world. If you're not familiar with him, that's okay. I highly recommend you check out his films. There's a link here for you. That's a four-part documentary about him as a filmmaker and storyteller. What you'll like the most from this is that he doesn't create his films through scripts, they're all from storyboards. So I've left a link below in the slide for you so you can look at that at another time. Whew, we have just gone through a lot, and I just want to do a quick recap of this workshop for you, just to have quick takeaways of everything we've just gone over. So, know where you want to share your story so you can properly format it and follow time restrictions. Authentic storytelling is making yourself accountable to the truth and being flexible to honoring the theme. The three building blocks of fiction are world, character, and relationships. I'll also just add that that's really the building blocks of any story. So you'll always refer back to world, character, and relationships to create your foundation of your story. For the voice of your characters, use collages, mimic them, and observe others to create a unique and authentic voice for your character. I will also just add here that if you're writing from the perspective of a character that you don't know much about. For example, I actually wrote a play where the protagonist was a trans woman, and I honestly do not know much about the trans community. So I reached out to a friend who did, is a trans man, and was able to have them read my script and point out the areas that were outdated. Finally, draw from the perspective of your protagonist or an omniscient view when you're storyboarding. And finally, I'll leave you with, take what works for you and leave the rest, because you're going to talk to a lot of people. I encourage you to talk to the people even in this group right now, because you're all here for the same reason. Ask each other what has worked for you and what hasn't, and apply those methods to create your process. Now, what questions do you have?